Member for Nollamara.
Please accept my congratulations on your election and to all the members elected to this Parliament. I thank the Parliament staff for their warm welcome and assistance. I would like to acknowledge some of our people, the traditional owners on whose country we meet. I am mindful of the rights and obligations they have to this land and the ongoing spiritual and cultural connection they have to the southwest. I would like to acknowledge and thank the people of Nollamara for the faith they have put in me and the honour they have afforded me so that I have this privilege of making my inaugural speech as the member for Nollamara. I acknowledge the good work of the past members in the area, the Hon John Kabelke, Margaret Quirk, the Hon Bob Kachira, and not to forget that community campaigner Ted Cunningham. The new electorate of Nollamara includes the suburbs of Alexander Heights, Nollamara, Mirrabooka, Kundula, Westminster and a section of Dianella. I appreciate the generosity of the different communities in Nollamara as they have invited me in and shared their joys and disappointments during and since the election. I look forward to applying my energy and skills to working in the Nollamara community to build a better future for them and Western Australia. The fundamental responsibility of a Member of Parliament is to listen to the people, represent them and seek common sense outcomes in such a way as to advance their interests and the common good. Part of this responsibility is to work with the federal government and local governments to ensure efficient and effective government, to be clear about what we are responsible for and to work together for the public interest. The Nollamara electorate is rich in its diversity, with people from all walks of life and from all countries that can be walked. It has a large Indigenous community, the dominant language spoken other than English is Vietnamese, and the area has a secular diversity and cooperation that would be sought after in many countries. The goal of our community should be to ensure that such a rich cultural heritage is celebrated, that tolerance and acceptance is valued, and that the vibrant community it delivers is enjoyed. I would like to congratulate both the City of Stirling and the City of Wanneroo for their development of these areas to promote and develop its well-being. The Nollamara electorate has a relatively young population, with 30% of the population under 19, 22% under 14. Therefore, quality education is vital. It has indeed been a pleasure to visit the schools in the electorate to witness the dedication of the staff and the enthusiasm of the children. The schools in the area have an outstanding calibre of teaching and support staff that strive for the best learning and social outcomes. I was particularly impressed during my visit to the Kundula Primary School and the Integrated Services Centre, which is funded from the Department for Communities, Office of Multicultural Interests. Through this innovative whole-of-government program, on-site assistance with health, social and trauma issues can be directly and quickly addressed to the benefit of the children and the community as a whole. A recent report to government on this pilot project found it to be effective and recommended ongoing funding for this facility and an extension to other schools. Special congratulations should also go to the Health Department for their funding of the Happy Kids program, which runs at Mirrabooka, Nollamara, Dryandra and Westminster primary schools. The program celebrated its 10th anniversary this year, and the dedication of the Deputy Principal at Mirrabooka Primary School in driving this program, along with his colleagues, is to be commended. My thanks also to the staff and parents at other schools in the electorate for the warm welcome they have shown me. The work of these great primary schools and their teaching staff is continued at Mirrabooka Senior High School, which embraces and celebrates its diversity. The school has over 55 nationalities and language groups represented. While celebrating and catering for the challenges this creates, the core commitment of the school is to ensure that all students reach their full potential. I had the honour of witnessing this commitment at their recent graduation ceremony, where all of the students entering Year 12 graduated, many with awards attesting to their high level of academic and vocational achievements. And that may not seem so surprising, but for many of them, they started off in English language centres before they began in their high school careers or high school studies. It's clear to me that education is the foundation for the health and prosperity of our community and our state. The source of this obligation to the community is the development of our children. This makes the provision of community services, quality childcare and the role of early childhood education vital. The importance of this early education and socialisation is being demonstrated in Nollamara with the Communities for Children program. The C4C programs increases learning outcomes for children, ensuring successful transition from home to school and throughout life. I first heard about this exciting approach to the health and development of our children at a conference on crime prevention in 2005. Without exception at this conference, presenters from police to pollies all emphasised the critical period in preventing crime is in our children's early years of development. If we truly want the best for our children, then programs which support our communities, such as the C4C, must continue to be funded. There seems universal agreement in this place that we are committed to the community. My personal experience is as a volunteer board member in the community legal sector for the last 20-odd years. It is with great respect that I have witnessed many dedicated workers deal compassionately and competently with some of the most complex and distressing cases of disadvantage and difficulty. In saying this, I would also like to recognise the commitment of those in the frontline services of government, such as housing, health, child protection and police. These people work with issues in our community that many of us have limited appreciation of or exposure to. Community services are vital to ensuring we build an economically sustainable, inclusive and cohesive Western Australia. And as policymakers, we need to acknowledge that such services require sufficient funding to deliver the resources required for success. For too long, governments of all persuasions have contracted out these services to the community sector without meeting the full costs. While the cost-benefit to government may look good on the balance sheet, the cost-benefit to the community is often negative. This is no more evident than when unemployment is at all-time low and workers leave the community sector taking their knowledge and capability to higher-paying industries. Those that stay because of commitment have to deal with rising costs and decreasing ability to deliver an appropriate level of services. It is clearly time to stop the cost shifting from government to the community sector and to ensure that the funding of the sector reflects the real cost of providing these invaluable services to the community. Building community cohesion and collective involvement goes across all sectors of our society: our playgroups, the PNCs, the PCYCs, sporting and youth clubs, the RSLs, the ratepayer associations, to name just a few. Organisations like the Kundula Ratepayers Association and seniors clubs like the Belga and Alexander Heights demonstrate to me the ongoing commitment and effort needed to develop our community. I would also like on this day to acknowledge the Nollamara SES. These organisations are in many ways reliant on volunteers, something that has become progressively more difficult in WA, as we have seen hours of work increase markedly in recent years. Hours that eat into our leisure time and our capacity to participate in our school fetes, our sporting clubs and in our community. For me, working hours is a critical issue that impacts on volunteering and community participation, and a matter that needs addressing by policymakers. This is especially so when governments and organisations throughout Australia profess a commitment to work-life family balance. Work-life balance is dear to my heart, as it is through the support of my previous employers that I have been able to build my career while being able to participate fully in my family life. I am one of the lucky 1 out of 3 women in Australia that receive paid parental leave, a critical factor for all women in their continued participation in the workforce and therefore contribution to the economy and to the well-being of their children. However, work-life family balance is under threat, as around 2 million Australians, the highest proportion of any country in the OECD and second only to Korea, work in excess of 50 hours a week each and every week. I congratulate the previous Labor government on establishing the review into extended working hours and to the adoption of the Working Hours Code of Practice in 2006. However, we should go further and establish clear regulations on what constitutes a working day and a working week. Parameters, I maintain, that are vital to establishing a clear foundation for work-life balance and for proper compensation for working additional hours or overtime. I would like to thank those in the Australian Labor Party and the Labor movement who supported me as the candidate for Nollamara. In particular, I would like to thank the LHMU, the President, Nina Devlin, the Secretary, Dave Kelly, the Assistant Secretaries, Carolyn Smith and Kelly Shea, all of the executive staff and members who have supported me. I am a proud Misso. In addition, my thanks to all of those at Unions WA for their support. I acknowledge the responsibility that this position entails in defending and reinforcing the values of the Labor Party and the union movement, with its principles that encompass compassion and values human worth. I am a firm supporter of the Labor's core belief that a fair society is one which ensures all of its people are cared for and have fair access to the wealth of the state and nation. In addition, Labor values for me have their foundation in the belief that society functions at its best when it acts together, collectively. Not when it focuses on individual gain and blame, but when it values the need to participate and the right to dissent. It is this commitment to the working people at the heart of Labor values which is a core belief that I bring to this place. Being an employee of the MISOs was a rewarding experience, as the LHMU is a union dedicated to its predominantly low-paid members and to bringing about positive social change that improves workers' lives. The LHMU is a union with approximately 70% women membership from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Its members are found in a wide range of industries, including cleaning, health workers, laundry workers, security guards, carers, hospitality, manufacturing and early education workers, to mention a few. It was during my time as a MISO that I experienced firsthand the ravages of the previous Liberal government's workplace agreements legislation as an organiser in the contract cleaning industry. I watched vulnerable people have their wages bargained down by companies driven by margins and a system that undermined any capacity to pay decent wages. Many of these employers were as much a victim of the race to the bottom as were the workers, as tender processes undermined the award safety net. Having witnessed this process and the distress of workers whose only solution to reduction in wage rates was to increase their working hours, I became committed to exposing the fallacy of the rhetoric that workers had a choice to make individual agreements with their employer. The subsequent federal work choices legislation, which was modelled on the previous Liberal government workplace laws, was exposed for what it was, and the Australian people reinforced their strong commitment to fairness for workers in November 2007. When I worked on the Your Rights at Work campaign, I was always encouraged by those I spoke to in the community who would acknowledge the importance of protections for workers, the rights to bargain collectively, and the need for fairness and equity in our workplace laws and regulations. It is interesting to note that most people believe that legislators legislate for the benefit of all people. This was made very clear to me when campaigning against work choices. I was asked, "Why do you have to argue about this? Why can't you sit down and talk with each other?" It was disheartening having to explain that the government refused to negotiate with the union movement and therefore we needed to campaign. This is an important message for governments of any persuasion. If you are not in dialogue with the Labor movement, you are not talking to a great number of people in WA. Prior to the September election, the previous Labor government also recognised the importance of ensuring fairness and equity for cleaners and agreed that workers employed to work in government buildings, whether directly employed or employed through a contractor, would be recognised for doing the same job and paid the same accordingly. I would call on the current government to honour this commitment, as it is only fair and reasonable that workers be paid according to the work they undertake, not at a rate less than that because their work is outsourced by government to contractors. If it is good enough to increase teachers' pay, it should be good enough to increase cleaners' pay. In my 15 years in the Labor movement, I also had the opportunity to be the Assistant Secretary of Unions WA, to argue for pay equity, a fair minimum wage, and to be appointed as a member of the WorkSafe Commission, Work Cover Board, and represent workers on 2 industry superannuation funds. I was honoured to work with the Indigenous Committee on the campaign for compensation for stolen wages. I would call on the current government to continue to ensure this historic injustice is remedied. My experience has exposed me to many instances of unfairness, but none is more outdated for me than the age discrimination perpetrated in the Workers' Compensation and Injury Management Act. Section 56 of the Act provides that workers' weekly compensation payments cease at 65. Where a worker is injured just prior to 65 or after, they are only entitled to a year's compensation. This provision directly conflicts with the Equal Opportunity Act. In a society where 50 is the new 30 and workers are not required to retire at 65, placing workers at risk of not receiving compensation if they are injured seems inconceivable in 2008. The argument should not and cannot be about age, but about medical fitness. The career opportunities I have had reinforce my fundamental belief that economic independence is a cornerstone to a healthy community and the economic stability vital to the well-being of our state. Having represented workers who suffered workplace injuries and were unable to return to employment, I have personal experience of the devastating effects that unemployment has for people. The capacity for our economy to deliver the lowest unemployment rates in history over the last few years should be recognised as the crowning achievement of the previous Labor government and to the current Leader of the Opposition as the previous Treasurer. Further, I applaud the Hawke-Keating government's establishment of the universal superannuation and the establishment of industry funds which operate for the sole purpose of beneficiaries and provide economic independence in retirement. I recognise the fear that currently surrounds the global financial crisis and agree with the Prime Minister that the excesses of capitalism have not served us well. My experience as an economic undergraduate in the 1980s taught me only too well that the doctrine of neoclassical economics and the rule of the market dominated to the exclusion of all other economic theory. I, however, was never convinced by the supply and demand tables that would assume away other factors in our economic environment. It is clear to me now that the faith in the free market has failed. Therefore, achieving real gains for the economy and alleviating disadvantage and poverty can only be realised by a resourced public sector, active regulation and applications of the tool of government expenditure. Many WA citizens are doing it tough. This is certainly evident in the electorate of Nollamara, where in 2006 census unemployment was 5%. The median individual income was $407, almost $100 less than the $504 minimum wage at that time, and significantly less than the 2006 average weekly earnings of $879. These figures have serious implications, as outlined in the recent Australian Institute. Can I have an extension, please? Thank you. These figures have serious implications, as outlined in the recent Australian Institute of Family Studies report on social inclusion, where it found areas of concentration income poverty impact negatively on children's wellbeing and life chances. So while the areas I represent may not be in the country, in many ways they are remote and regional from the experiences of other Western Australians, and providing services to them to ensure their development is vital to the well-being of the whole WA community. I remember vividly as a young woman meeting Sir Ronald Wilson when he addressed a community meeting. His clarity of conviction was a key motivator for me, and his message has remained with me that it's not about equal opportunities, it's about opportunities afforded to people which ensure equality of outcome. For me, this should not be a premise simply for social policy, but for our economic policy as well. One of the greatest economic challenges that faces us, however, is the environmental challenge. Our environment is as fragile as it is beautiful, and as custodians for future generations, we need to act. We need to support economic tools that ensure investment in sustainable technology and manufacturing. We need to support economic tools that ensure investment in sustainable technology and manufacturing, and that it is prioritised over cost-shifting, environmentally damaging processes. In short, we must put sustainability into the economic models and put a price on carbon. In addition, we need to continue to educate the population about their usage of our scarce resources. We need to encourage them to use alternative forms of energy and make it second nature to recycle their waste, restrict water usage, compost their food scraps, and get on a bike to go to the corner shop or perhaps even work. Excuse me. The 2006 census of suburbs in the Nollamara electorate indicated that they have a greater propensity to use motor vehicles to go to work in comparison to any other areas in the local councils. My anecdotal evidence would indicate that they would indeed make greater use of public transport if efficient transport was available to them. It is clear that the residents of Nollamara, as with the residents of the whole of WA, see public transport and the provision of reliable and efficient transport as a priority in addressing the environmental challenge. With respect to waste disposal, many residents are concerned about how waste is disposed of in the area and support the implementation of the container deposit legislation. In closing, I would like to acknowledge and give thanks to those that have supported me to be here today. I am grateful and thankful to my wonderful family, in particular my parents, who have instilled me with the confidence and capacity to know my own self-worth while accepting my responsibility to the community. To my dear sister, who has always been my best friend and number one supporter, thank you. To my brother, who worked himself sick to get me elected, thank you. To their supportive partners, I appreciate your contribution to me personally and politically. Growing up in the WA of the 70s and 80s, my life was peppered with many opportunities, one of which was access to free university education. At university, I discovered the F word. Yes, that's right, feminism. My commitment to women's rights was brought home to me when in my first politics tutorial we were advised we were about to learn political history and the isms that changed the world. Capitalism, socialism, communism, fascism. When I asked whether feminism was to be included, I was dismissed with some considerable disdain, as it was explained to me that feminism wasn't a political theory. Perhaps there is an intellectual argument to be had on this, but there is no argument that the fundamental premise of feminist theory of equality of women in society has and continues to change the world. I would especially like to thank the women who have inspired, mentored, taught and just demonstrated to me the fundamental humanity in women's participation in all aspects of society. I would like to acknowledge the profound impact Helen Creed, Sharon Jackson, Cathy Digwood have had on my professional development, and Anne Giles, Lecky Hopkins, Diana McTiernan and the Bradshaw women on my spiritual development. I would particularly like to honour Senator Pat Giles and Dr Carmen Lawrence, who have inspired me in their capacity to achieve so much for their communities with grace, honour and inclusivity. It is also with thanks to women like the Honourable Sue Ellery and the Honourable Cheryl Davenport that women like me are in this place in numbers to influence policy and bring diversity that public debate needs to gain policy and legislation that is for all people. My thanks also to the many supportive male colleagues and my mentor. For the vast network of friends and colleagues that have enriched my life, I thank you. In particular, those of you that found the time and resources in your busy lives to contribute to my campaign to become the member for Nollamara. It was a great honour to have you participate, and I thank you very much, especially all those that hit the pavement, came door knocking, contributed to my campaign, and those that are with me today. Thank you. The capacity to be part of my communities I inhabit has been one of the most cherished things in my life. To my wonderful neighbourhood community, the school community, and my book club, I thank you for your support. I would single out the Nollamara campaign team and assorted other helpers for special thanks. Thank you Danny, Anne, John, Jodie, Shani, Phil, Helena, Ali, Lauren, Joe, Pollen, Kim, James, Karma, two Fionas, Samuel, Rose and Bob. And anyone I've forgotten, I apologise. I would also like to thank the Honourable John Kabelke, Anne, Leda and Ken, and Margaret Quirk, Michelle, Katie, Kylie and Tony for their moral support through the campaign and their assistance since being elected. To the most important people in my life, John and Thomas, a special thanks for always returning me to the simple truth that at the end of the day, I am Mum and Janine, and the daily routines of life continue. Thank you.